All right, Ruth chapter 4. This is a good, rich story, and we've seen that. Naomi knows Boaz. Of course, Bethlehem is her home, just like it is for Boaz. So she knows Boaz. He's kinfolks to her husband, Elimelech, who is now gone. But she's been paying attention since they got back from Moab to how Boaz treats Ruth. He's paying attention to her and watching her pretty closely. And he's provided for her, making sure that, because he knows, excuse me, he knows the situation with Naomi and Ruth, that they have no one to provide an income. Ruth has been just gleaning in the fields, which is, you know how much grain you could pick up after, they're harvesting by hand, so, and they were instructed to leave some, let it fall, or don't pick it up if it drop it. So that there was some grain left in the field for them to get, but can you imagine to go around and pick up what grain was left after a harvest went through? And that's all you had. That's all you had to eat. She's been watching. And she is confident that Boaz is not going to waste any time getting this estate business settled. And sure enough, she's been to the threshing floor and she makes her proposal to him. Take your maidservant under your wing. And that's her way of saying, proposing it was a marriage deal. Although it wasn't real romantic, but it was to provide for her, as well as her husband's estate, as we'll find out here in a minute. So Boaz gets up. He loads Ruth up with barley. You remember he tells her to take her wrap off and hold it. And he measures out 6 ephahs of grain into her tunic, or whatever, shawl, one version says. If the math we did is right, it's almost 200 pounds of grain. And we showed pictures of the fields they call the fields of Boaz, which is down on the slopes below Bethlehem. If she had to pack that for a quarter to a half a mile, how many of you ladies want to pack that? It's been a struggle, I think, for her to get back to town. But he loads her up just about daylight. It's just barely light enough for them to be able to see. In fact, you couldn't distinguish who was who, it says. Boaz loads her up and then he heads to town. And he goes directly to the gate of the city, where he expects to find this near kinsman that he mentioned to Ruth the night before at the threshing floor. And would you look at that? Near kinsman happens by pretty quickly. He's probably on his way out to the field to work. It's early in the morning, and he's leaving town and headed out to work, I think. Boaz invites him to sit down. Come aside and sit down and talk business. And he invites 10 of the elders of the town to sit down as well, which indicates to everyone there that he's got serious business to transact. We need, not only do we need to talk, we need to have witnesses. So what's fixing to happen is legal. Boaz begins by saying, Naomi, after returning from the plain of Moab, has decided to sell the property that belonged to our relative Elimelech. I thought to uncover your ear, is the way the Hebrew reads. I thought to uncover your ear by saying, buy it back in the presence of the inhabitants and the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not redeem it, then tell me, that I may know, for there is no one but you to redeem it, and I am next after you. And he said, I'll redeem it. If you could just about hear Boaz's heart hit the floor. He didn't want him to redeem it. So he continues, Boaz does. On the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you must also acquire Ruth, the Moabitess, the wife of the dead Mahalath, to raise up the name of the dead on his inheritance. Notice he's buying just a field. Remember what I told you when we were looking at pictures last time. Each of those little plots of ground that were outlined with all the stones that came out of the field, each one of those belonged to a family, or to one person. And so that's what he is buying from Naomi's hand, was Elimelech's portion of the ground. And he's also acquiring a wife in the deal. Well, the near kinsman said, I cannot redeem it for myself. I can't take a chance on losing my inheritance. And it's hard for us maybe to discern what he's talking about. But if he had no son, and he took Ruth as a wife, and had a son by her, then that son would inherit Elimelech's property, but he would also inherit that man's property if he never had a son by his first wife, if he's married, or by a second wife, if he was married to another woman and didn't have any other children, any other sons. So it would mess up his inheritance for him to take Ruth as a wife. Or is the chance that it would. And so he backs out. He says, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I ruin my own inheritance. You redeem my right of redemption for yourself, for I cannot redeem. In verse 7, now this was the custom in former times in Israel as far as redeeming and exchanging. To confirm anything, one man would take off his sandal and give it to the other. This was an attestation. This was his bill of sale or deed to the land. I want to read you something in reference to this. In Deuteronomy chapter 25, I'm going to make a note where that's at so you can read this passage again later, maybe. In chapter 25, Deuteronomy, verse 5 through 10, listen, he's talking about this Levirate marriage arrangement, okay? If two brothers dwell close together, and one of them dies and has no son, the widow of the dead man shall not be married to a stranger outside the family. Her husband's brother shall go into her and take her as his wife and perform the duties of a husband's brother to her. And it shall be that the firstborn son which she bears will succeed to the name of the dead brother, and that his name may not be blotted out in Israel. So it's a way of protecting the dead man's family life. Okay? Verse 7. But if the man does not want to take his brother's wife, then let his brother's wife go up to the gate to the elders and say, my husband's brother refuses to raise up a name to his brother in Israel. He will not perform the duty of my husband's brother. Then the elders of his city shall call him and speak to him. And if he stands firm and says, I do not want to take her, then his brother's wife shall come to him in the presence of the elders, remove his sandal from his foot, spit in his face, and answer and say, so shall it be done to the man who will not build up his brother's house. And his name shall be called in Israel, the house of him who has his sandal removed. So he gets an instant bad reputation It's interesting, the traditions that people have. The kinsman said to Boaz, "You buy it for yourself," and he took off his sandals. So he's showing that he is intended to be done with this transaction. Boaz addressed all the leaders and all the people who are standing around. Of course, this kind of thing in the gate of the city, people coming and going now, going out to work in the field or just being in town shopping early, would draw a crowd. "You are all witnesses today that I am purchasing from Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon. Also, I am acquiring as my wife the woman from Moab, the wife of Mahlon, in order to raise up in the name of the deceased an heir for his property, so that the name of the deceased will not be cut off from him, from his kinsman, and from the gate of this place. You are witnesses today." All the people at the gate and the leader said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who has come into your house like Rachel and Leah, who between them built up the house of Israel. May you prosper in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem." We mentioned earlier in the lesson before, Ephrathah is just like, I think it's like the county or the area where Bethlehem is. And that blessing that they pronounced on Boaz that morning is indeed come to pass, because Ruth is the great-grandmother of King David. And then Solomon was the greatest king. David's son Solomon was the greatest king Israel ever saw. And eventually, the king of the world would be their descendant, Jesus Christ. May your house, because of the seed the Lord will give from this young woman, become like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. Now, you remember the story we spent a part of the lesson here 3 or 4 weeks ago now, about Judah and Tamar, how she dressed up and pretended to be a harlot when he was on his way to Timnah to shear his sheep, and he stops by her little booth or whatever it was she had. Anyway, this is the son that came from that relationship. All right, and Perez was the oldest of the 2 boys that Tamar bore. She bore twins. His family was of some prominence, and is mentioned in Nehemiah chapter 11, verse 4 through 6. He's listed. This is after the people have the first wave, I guess, the first group of people came back from the Persian captivity. His name is mentioned as having 468 valiant men, fighting men, that lived in Jerusalem, that were prominent in the politics and things of the day. So they would have. I mean, that was quite a blessing to pronounce on. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she gave birth to a son. And right about here, the story kind of changes. It's no more about Ruth. Ruth's involved. It's not that she goes away completely, but listen to what he says. Then the women said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, who today has provided you a redeemer. May his name be famous in Israel. And may he restore your life and provide for your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and is better than 7 sons to you, has borne him." Naomi took the child and laid it on her breast, and she became his nurse. The women who were her neighbors gave him a name. They said, "A son has been born to Naomi." And they called his name Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. So Naomi ends up being a grandma. And you think a couple of 3 chapters earlier, she probably gave up on ever being a grandma. She didn't expect that this child will be considered legally her grandchild. And he's gonna inherit what Elimelech had and Mahlon's property, and so his line will continue. Boaz is his father, but because Ruth was his mother, his line will go from Elimelech, and not be. Boaz is mentioned in the genealogies as his father, and he indeed is his father, but it is Mahlon's line, Elimelech's line, that he continues. And our Father has great plans for this family line. They give us a genealogy at the end of the chapter there. The genealogy of Perez. And it goes like this. It starts with Judah, really. Judah is the father of Perez. And Perez of Hezron. And then Ram. And then Amminadab. And then Nachshon. Then Solomon. Then Boaz and Jesse and David. That was a big deal in Israel, to be in the line of King David. But it goes further. If we went on with the line, and you can read it in Matthew and in Luke, the first parts of those books, they have, one starts at Jesus and goes back to Adam, and the other one starts at starts in ancestor and goes down through Jesus Christ. It's Jesus' line. And that's a big deal for the whole world, for all time. It's a big deal. While we look at the story of Ruth and Boaz, you can see how Boaz demonstrates the love and care of our Father in heaven. He notices her. He's impressed with her, the way she takes care of Naomi, the sacrifices that she makes, the hard work she puts in, gleaning in the fields, and all. And she does it just because she loves Naomi. Boaz provides for her. He knows how desperate her situation is, and he helps her out as he can. He cares for her. He gives an abundance of food. 200 pounds of grain would last you quite a while if you were just eating a couple of handfuls a day. So it would last. He stands up for her at the gate. You remember when he's talking to the near kinsman? And he said, you must take this woman. She deserves to be taken care of. And he stands up for her, and he takes her to himself as a wife. And I can see from our vantage point the story of our kinsman redeemer, Jesus Christ, who has stepped forward and became one of us. He walked in our dirt, he breathed our air, he slept on the rocks in our ground. He bought us back, restoring our relationship with our Father. He takes us as his church. He takes us, those who are in him, the scripture says, as his bride, to love, to cherish, to enjoy, without a spot or wrinkle or blemish. I got to read you some words here from Ephesians 5. You're familiar with it, I'm sure, but we'll go through verse 25 and following. Husbands, love your wives, just like Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her, that he might sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of water by the word, that he might present it to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that it should be holy and without blemish. So husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but he nourishes and cherishes it, just as the Lord does the church. For we are members of his body. For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. Nevertheless, let each one of you in particular so love his own wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. Good advice. It's a great mystery, Paul says. You and your mate, and Christ and his church. One is to be a picture of the other. We don't normally think of it the same, but it's the same. It is to be the same. The key to this great mystery is to be in him. In him we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins according to the riches of his grace. Ephesians chapter 1 verse 7 says. In him you get to have the part of Ruth in your own story. God will come for you. He does come for you. Don't turn him down.